The tennis world is on fire, and nobody saw it coming. Alex Eala, a 19-year-old from Manila who most casual fans couldn't pick out of a lineup 3 weeks ago, just orchestrated the most explosive commercial takeover in Women's Tennis Association history. We're not talking about a gradual rise to stardom. We're talking about a financial detonation so massive, so perfectly timed, and so brilliantly executed that it's forcing every player, every sponsor, and every tennis executive to ask one terrifying question: has the game changed forever? This isn't a story about winning a Grand Slam. This isn't about a Cinderella run through Wimbledon or a dramatic five-set thriller at the US Open. This is about something far more powerful and far more controversial. This is about a teenager who figured out that in 2026, you don't need trophies to have power. You just need to understand how the modern world actually works. And Alex Eala? She understood it better than anyone. Let me paint you the picture. 48 hours. That's all it took for Eala to go from promising prospect to economic phenomenon. Her official merchandise line sold out completely in 6 hours flat. Not just in the Philippines, where she's a national hero, but in Tokyo, Singapore, Los Angeles, and New York. Her social media followers didn't just grow, they exploded, doubling overnight in a surge that left analytics experts scrambling to verify the numbers were real. Brands that had ghosted her agent's emails for months were suddenly scrambling, offering six-figure sponsorship deals with trembling hands and sweaty palms. Ticket sales for her matches, even at smaller challenger events, spiked by 340%. People who'd never watched tennis in their lives were buying tickets just to see what the hype was about. This wasn't organic growth. This wasn't a viral moment. This was a calculated, precision-engineered business explosion that made tech startup launches look amateur by comparison. And the tennis establishment? They're absolutely losing their minds. To understand why this matters, you need to understand who Alex Eala was before this happened. She was never supposed to be here. The Philippines had never produced a WTA star. The infrastructure wasn't there. The funding wasn't there. The pathway to professional tennis from Southeast Asia was barely a dirt road, let alone a highway. But Eala didn't care about what wasn't there. She cared about what could be. At 14 years old, she left everything behind. While her friends were worrying about high school crushes and weekend plans, Eala was on a plane to Spain, heading to the Rafa Nadal Academy. She spent her teenage years grinding on red clay courts, learning from champions, bleeding through blisters, and carrying the crushing weight of an entire nation's expectations on her shoulders. Every match wasn't just about her ranking points. It was a statement to every Filipino kid watching from internet cafes and living rooms across the archipelago. We belong here too. But belonging and thriving are completely different things. The WTA Tour is absolutely brutal. It chews up prodigies for breakfast and spits out cautionary tales before lunch. Eala knew this reality intimately. She watched players with bigger names, better funding, and stronger support systems rise through the rankings while she fought through qualifiers, scraping together ranking points like they were currency in a collapsed economy. Injuries came. Doubt crept in like fog. There were quiet, lonely moments in anonymous hotel rooms across Europe where she probably lay awake wondering if the sacrifice was worth it. Then something shifted. It wasn't a tournament victory. It wasn't a viral upset against a top 10 player. It was quieter than that, more deliberate. Eala started building something off the court, a social media presence that felt genuinely authentic, a connection with fans that felt real and unfiltered. She wasn't just posting highlight reels and practice videos, she was sharing her actual story. The late-night practice sessions when her body screamed for rest, the homesickness that hit in waves, the small victories that don't make ESPN headlines but mean everything to someone fighting their way up from nothing. Filipinos rallied around her. Southeast Asia started paying attention. But still, in the grand scheme of professional tennis, she was just another rising player in an ocean of rising players. No one, absolutely no one, predicted what was about to happen. Because what came next wasn't about tennis skill. It was about timing, strategy, and understanding that the game had fundamentally changed. The old rules didn't apply anymore. Eala was about to prove that you don't need a Grand Slam title to become the most powerful player in the room. You just need to know how the room actually works in 2026. The tennis world was watching her forehand. They should have been watching her business model. Here's where the story gets absolutely wild. The explosion happened over one weekend. Business reporters, not sports journalists, were the first ones to notice something strange. Sales data from e-commerce platforms across Asia showed unprecedented spikes. Her official merchandise line, a limited edition capsule collection designed by a Filipino-American streetwear artist, dropped on a Friday morning. By Friday evening, it was completely sold out. Not just the popular items, everything. Sizes that never sell, the overpriced accessories, the weird color combinations, gone. The website crashed 3 times from traffic overload. Simultaneously, and this is where the genius becomes apparent, a mini documentary series about her journey premiered. But it wasn't on the Tennis Channel or ESPN. It was on Netflix. 5 bite-sized episodes, each under 20 minutes. Beautifully shot, emotionally devastating, following Eala's journey from Manila to the professional tour. The series was designed for people who don't watch tennis. Edited like a prestige drama, scored like a feature film. Non-tennis fans were crying over this girl's story, sharing episodes with friends, posting about it on social media. At the exact same time, influencers across Southeast Asia started posting about Eala. And here's the critical detail. These weren't sports influencers. They were lifestyle creators, fashion bloggers, tech reviewers, people whose audiences had never thought about tennis. And they weren't posting obvious paid advertisements. This was genuine content. They talked about representation, about seeing themselves in her story, about what it meant to watch someone who looked like them compete on a global stage against players from countries with centuries of tennis tradition. The algorithm absolutely loved it. The content spread like wildfire across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Within 72 hours, Eala was trending in 14 countries. Her name was mentioned more times on social media than some actual Grand Slam champions. And she hadn't even won a WTA title yet. Then came the bombshell announcement. A partnership with one of Asia's largest conglomerates, a massive corporation with divisions in technology, fashion, entertainment, and sports. But they weren't just sponsoring Eala. They were investing in her as a brand, as a platform, as a cultural movement. Billboards went up in Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok, and Kuala Lumpur. But they weren't advertising tennis tournaments. They were advertising Alex. Just her face, her name, and a simple tagline. The future plays different. The tennis establishment was absolutely stunned. Rival players logged into their social media accounts and watched their own engagement numbers, feeling a creeping sense of unease. Tennis commentators who'd been covering the sport for decades debated on air whether this was genius or gimmick, whether they were witnessing evolution or watching something fundamentally wrong. Fans were completely split. Some celebrated seeing a player take control of her own narrative, refusing to wait for the traditional gatekeepers to grant her permission to be successful. Others felt deeply uneasy, like they were watching something that didn't belong in the sport they loved. Because this wasn't just success. This was disruption. And disruption always makes people nervous. That's when the backlash started, and it came hard and fast. The tennis purists absolutely hated what they were seeing. Online forums exploded with accusations that flew like volleys across the net. She's buying her way to relevance. This isn't about tennis anymore, it's about marketing. She hasn't earned this level of attention. The criticism was swift and sharp, coming from every direction. Retired players with verified Twitter accounts, respected commentators with decades of experience, fans who believed tennis should remain pure, untouched by the influencer economy and corporate manipulation. A former top 10 player, someone who'd won actual titles and earned her success the right way, posted a tweet that barely concealed its contempt. Remember when success on court determined your worth off it? The tweet got 40,000 likes within hours. The message was crystal clear. Eala was cheating the system, not with performance-enhancing drugs, but with something tennis found even more uncomfortable to talk about: money, influence, and understanding modern media better than the establishment. Rival players started speaking up, carefully at first. In press conferences, when journalists asked about Eala's explosion, the responses were diplomatically cold. Good for her, I guess. I prefer to focus on my ranking. Translation: this isn't real tennis success. One player speaking off the record to a journalist she trusted was more blunt. It's easy to be popular when you have a corporation building your image. Try doing it with just a racket and your game. The divide wasn't just philosophical, it was deeply practical. Smaller players, those grinding through challenger tournaments without major sponsorships, barely scraping by financially, felt the sting acutely. They watched Eala's sudden rise and wondered, is this the future? Do we all need marketing teams and influencer campaigns just to survive? Because if that's the game now, most of us are already losing before we even step on court. Social media became an absolute battlefield. Eala's fans, fiercely protective, mostly young, mostly from Southeast Asia, clashed constantly with traditionalists. Accusations of racism started bubbling up in comment sections. You only hate her success because she's Filipina. You can't handle that tennis is changing and the power is shifting. The responses were equally heated. This has nothing to do with nationality. It has everything to do with integrity and what this sport is supposed to be about. But the most cutting criticism came from an unexpected source. A highly respected tennis journalist, someone who'd covered the sport for 30 years and was generally beloved by players, published an opinion piece with a headline that cut like a blade. When popularity replaces performance, the dangerous precedent of Eala. The article didn't attack Eala personally. It didn't question her work ethic or her talent. Instead, it questioned the entire system. The journalist argued that if players can manufacture relevance through corporate partnerships and social media manipulation, tennis stops being a meritocracy. The best player doesn't win. The best marketed player does. And once that door opens, it never closes. The piece went absolutely viral, shared thousands of times, debated on sports shows, referenced in other articles. It forced conversations that tennis had been desperately avoiding for years. Conversations about inequality, about access, about whether the sport was becoming a playground exclusively for whoever had the deepest pockets and the smartest public relations team. Eala stayed silent through most of the firestorm. No defensive tweets, no emotional press conferences, no carefully worded statements from her team. Just a single Instagram story, a photo of her practicing alone at dawn, the court empty except for her and her shadow. The caption read simply, "The work doesn't change." But silence wasn't enough for the critics. They wanted answers. They wanted accountability. And some were calling for the WTA itself to step in and address what they saw as a fundamental threat to competitive integrity. Then the truth came out, and it was somehow more fascinating than anyone expected. The investigation wasn't official, but it was thorough. Business reporters, following the money like they were trained to do, started digging into the corporate partnership. What they found wasn't a scandal. It was a blueprint, a masterclass in modern athlete branding. Court documents and business filings revealed that the partnership deal had been in the works for months, carefully planned and strategically timed. The Asian conglomerate wasn't just throwing money at a rising tennis player. They'd conducted extensive market research, analyzed demographic trends, and identified a massive gap in the market. Southeast Asia's rapidly growing middle class, hungry for representation in global sports, was vastly underserved by traditional tennis marketing, which focused almost exclusively on European and American markets. Eala wasn't just a talented player who happened to be Filipina. She was the perfect vehicle for reaching this enormous, untapped market. And the strategy they built around her was absolutely surgical in its precision. Phase 1 was authentic storytelling. The Netflix documentary wasn't vanity or ego. It was market positioning. The episodes were designed to be emotional and relatable, crafted specifically to pull in viewers who'd never watched a tennis match in their lives. Every element, from the pacing to the music to the interview subjects, was calibrated to create connection. Phase 2 was limited edition merchandise drops, but using streetwear hype tactics instead of traditional sports merchandise strategies. Create artificial scarcity, drive demand through exclusivity, make people feel like they're part of something special rather than just buying another athlete's t-shirt. The capsule collection wasn't about tennis, it was about identity and belonging. Phase 3 was influencer seeding, but done with genuine care. They didn't pay celebrities to post obvious advertisements. They built relationships with creators who actually aligned with Eala's story and values. The content felt organic because it was organic. These influencers genuinely cared about what she represented. But the timing of the posts? Coordinated. The messaging? Aligned. The combined reach? Absolutely explosive. The numbers backed up every decision. Sales data showed Eala's merchandise moving faster than products from some Grand Slam champions. Sponsorship experts estimated her brand value had increased by 600% in 3 weeks. She was being booked for appearances at fashion weeks and technology conferences, events that had absolutely nothing to do with tennis. Here's what made traditional tennis people so uncomfortable. It was completely legal, obviously smart, and it worked spectacularly. Eala's team had identified that modern celebrity isn't built on achievements alone anymore. It's built on narrative, timing, and distribution. She had all 3 elements in perfect alignment. Her agent, a former technology executive who understood platforms and algorithms in ways that traditional tennis agents never could, treated Eala like a tech startup rather than a tennis player. The goal wasn't just winning matches and climbing the rankings, it was building an entire ecosystem around her as a person and a brand. Every decision fed into the larger strategy. Critics called it manufactured and artificial. Supporters called it visionary and necessary. But everyone, regardless of which side they took, agreed on one fundamental thing. Tennis had never seen anything remotely like this before. Because Eala wasn't following the traditional path of waiting for on-court success to bring off-court opportunities. She was creating the opportunities first and using them to fuel her tennis success. The usual order of operations had been completely reversed. The conglomerate's CEO gave one interview about the partnership, and his quote perfectly captured the philosophical divide. "Alex represents the future. She's part of a new generation of athletes who understand they're not just competitors. They're brands, their movements, their cultural moments. We didn't create her talent. We didn't manufacture her story. We simply amplified her truth and made sure the world could hear it." But amplification has consequences. And in tennis, not everyone was ready for the volume to be turned up this loud. The WTA had a decision to make, and they were terrified of making the wrong one. The tension became impossible to ignore in the locker room, that supposedly sacred space where players exist away from cameras and public scrutiny. Players who'd barely acknowledged Eala's existence before were now forced to have opinions about her. Some refused to comment entirely, keeping their heads down and focusing on their own games. Others couldn't help themselves. At a tournament in Dubai, a top 20 player was asked directly about Eala's business model. Her response dripped with contempt. "I'd rather be known for my tennis than my Instagram strategy, but I suppose we all have different priorities." But not everyone was hostile. A few players, particularly younger ones fighting for their own survival on tour, saw opportunity instead of threat. If Eala could do this, maybe they could too. One player publicly praised her approach, telling reporters, "She's showing us we don't have to wait for the system to validate us. We don't have to hope tournament directors notice us or pray that sponsors give us a chance. We can build our own value and force them to pay attention." That single quote sparked its own firestorm of debate. Was tennis actively splitting into 2 camps? Traditionalists who believed in the old meritocracy versus entrepreneurs who understood the game had changed? The divide became visible everywhere. At press conferences, in player lounges, even during practice sessions. Some players mysteriously developed scheduling conflicts whenever Eala wanted to practice together. Others actively sought her out, asking questions about her team structure, her social media strategy, her approach to building partnerships. The tour felt fractured in a way it hadn't before, divided along generational and philosophical lines. Then came the WTA's official response, or rather the complete lack of one. After days of pressure from media, fans, and players, officials released a statement so generic it could have been written by a corporate algorithm. We celebrate players who engage with fans and build their brands within the guidelines of professional conduct. Translation: we're absolutely not touching this controversy with a 10-foot pole. The statement satisfied precisely nobody. Critics accused the WTA of enabling inequality and refusing to protect competitive integrity. Supporters said the WTA was scared of innovation and protecting an outdated business model. Everyone was angry, just for different reasons. But behind closed doors, serious meetings were happening. Sponsors were asking uncomfortable questions. If one player could generate this much attention and engagement without major titles, what did that mean for the traditional star-making system that tennis had relied on for decades? Were rankings even relevant anymore in determining a player's value? Some sponsors started quietly shifting their budgets, prioritizing engagement metrics and social media reach over world ranking positions. This terrified the tennis establishment because the implications were staggering. If engagement mattered more than performance, if followers were more valuable than titles, tennis as they knew it was over. The entire hierarchy would collapse. A player ranked 80th in the world with 2 million engaged followers could be worth exponentially more than a top 10 player with 200,000 passive fans who barely interacted with content. The meritocracy, already imperfect, would completely crumble. Eala finally broke her silence at a press conference following a match. The question came from a journalist who'd been critical of her approach, and it was deliberately confrontational. Do you think your current level of success and attention is actually deserved based on your tennis accomplishments? The room went completely silent. Every phone came up to record her answer. Eala took a breath, looked directly at the camera rather than the journalist, and spoke with absolute clarity. I've been working at this sport since I was 9 years old. I've earned everything I have on this court through sweat and sacrifice. What I do off the court, that's just understanding the world we actually live in, not the world people wish we still lived in. Tennis is a sport, yes, but it's also a business, and I'm not going to apologize for being good at both. The room stayed quiet for a moment after she finished. Some reporters nodded, almost involuntarily. Others looked deeply uncomfortable, like they'd just watched something they weren't supposed to see. That soundbite went instantly viral, shared millions of times across every platform. It became an immediate litmus test. If you agreed with Eala, you believed in athlete empowerment and adapting to modern reality. If you disagreed, you believed in tennis purity and traditional meritocracy. There was no middle ground anymore. You had to pick a side. So what does this all actually mean? Here's the truth that nobody in tennis wants to say out loud. The uncomfortable reality that everyone's dancing around. Alex Eala didn't break tennis. She didn't destroy anything. She simply exposed what it's already becoming, what it's been becoming for years while everyone pretended not to notice. We're watching the emergence of a sport where performance still matters, obviously, but where perception and cultural impact might actually matter more. Where a player's value isn't just measured in titles won and matches played, but in reach, influence, engagement, and cultural resonance. Is that wrong? It depends entirely on who you ask, and the answer reveals more about the person asking than about the question itself. For players who built their entire careers in the old system, the traditional path of win matches then earn sponsors. Then repeat the cycle, Eala's explosive rise feels like cheating. It feels like she skipped steps, took shortcuts, gamed the system. They worked for years to earn what she seems to have acquired overnight through marketing brilliance. But for younger players watching from the outside, trying desperately to break into a system that already feels rigged by funding disparities and access inequality, Eala looks like a blueprint for survival. She looks like proof that you don't have to wait for permission, that you don't have to accept the scraps the establishment offers. Because here's what the critics keep missing in their outrage. Tennis has always been about money. Always. From its earliest days as a sport for wealthy elites to the modern professional era, money has shaped everything. The difference now isn't that money matters. The difference is who controls it. For decades, tournaments, federations, and brands controlled the money. Players competed for scraps, grateful for whatever opportunities were offered. The power structure was clear and unchangeable. Eala flipped that entire dynamic. She built her own economic engine, created her own value, and forced the system to respond to her rather than the other way around. And whether you love it or hate it, whether you think it's the future or the death of everything good about tennis, it's working. Her sales numbers haven't dropped. If anything, they've continued growing. Brands aren't backing away nervously, they're leaning in harder, competing for access to her audience. The conglomerate partnership has already expanded into other markets across Asia and beyond. Eala's next merchandise drop is projected to generate more revenue than some WTA 250 tournaments produce in total prize money and sponsorship combined. Let that sink in. Her clothing line might make more money than an entire professional tennis tournament.